Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Side Stories.
Hello, everyone.
Nice, I'm here with Jacob, our wonderful guest of the day, who you might remember from the tail end of our last run of the show here.
Yes, I was there. I came, I saw, I guest starred.
Yeah, a few times. You see, you were on the George Hackenschmidt episode, and I
Yes.
know the final episode. And was that it? Was there anything else you were on?
I believe that was it, and it was the unscheduled appearance on the last episode, but I enjoyed that one quite a bit.
That one was really good, and that's also
Mhm.
where we got the unscheduled appearance from Soren.
Yes.
So, if this voice sounds familiar, yes, he was from that episode where we, I guess, ended things off, and now we're returning because,
Yes.
like any good thing, the show does not stay dead, and just like every terrible thing, the show does not stay dead because it's essentially the same principle when you're talking about this show.
This is true. This is true.
So, Jacob, what do you have today to share?
Today I'd like to educate people about, it sounds bad saying it this way, but my version of the Seminole Wars, as in just a heavily abridged version, because it's like reading Game of Thrones. There's a lot going on, and no one wants to read all that.
And unlike Game of Thrones, it'll actually be finished.
Oh, yes, no,
It's already done.
It's exactly, that's the benefit, you know. You don't have to wait for the last chapters to be written that will never happen.
They'll never
So-
happen. Game of Thrones will never end. Calling it now.
I hope it does,
It
but
won't. I'm sorry.
I'm terrified.
But
Anyway,
anyways, what made you interested in this topic? Why did you decide to bring it to us today?
I know it has a lot of importance to the history of actually this area where we live. A lot of important figures from this war served in the Civil War as well as the Indian conflicts afterwards.
And for the record, we are in North Dakota, by the way. That's
Yes.
the area in which we live.
The Dakotas, the Great Plains,
The best part of the country.
the hottest shindig around. No, I don't know if that one
The
works.
coldest
as well.
shindig around.
Yeah, coldest, that's for certain. But yes, so the Seminole Wars, there are 3 of them, and one of them involves a certain illegal invasion of a other nation's colony, as well as native-held land. It was a great time.
Sounds
for
like an
some
exciting
people.
adventure.
Yes,
for
it was an
everyone
adventure.
involved. Well, why don't we just jump into it? So, where does our story begin today, Jacob?
Certainly. So the story kind of begins well before the U.S. is the U.S. Before the United States rebels, and rightfully so, and asserts its claim over the New World back to the time where the colonial wars were going on between Britain and Spain is probably the best time to start.
And
Because
roughly what year is that? Or time frame?
that would be roughly the 1760s, late 1750s.
Okay,
7
so-
Years' War specifically is
Okay,
one of the
so
most important.
few
for this.
decades before the revolution kicks off.
Yes, because, so, just jumping the teensiest bit back farther, Spanish Florida exists, and it's mildly depopulated. A lot of natives, unfortunately, died in the Columbian exchange of diseases, and the Spanish were attempting to convert the rest. They were remarkably successful, because once that many people die, really, you either hide in the forests or, live your whole life in Florida with no one contacting you, because that happened quite a bit.
It
Or
still
you
happens
hang
a
out-
lot now in
Yep.
Florida, but for different reasons.
Exactly. Your old grandparents just hanging out.
Yeah, this was before old people decided to move to Florida, but it wasn't before other people decided to move to
Yes,
Florida.
it's-
It was for rough and tumble adventurers at one point.
There were always people who migrated to Florida just for different reasons at this time. But, so Florida is a good and relatively empty place. You'd either be slumming it with the Spanish, or you'd be out on your own. And it wasn't an awful place to be, all things considered. Especially considering what's happening in the rest of the New World at that time. It's a pretty good place to be. The Spanish aren't expanding much at all. They're just trying to maintain their missions. And it's that way until about 1763, in which all the Spanish pretty much leave for Cuba after Florida becomes a British holding due to the 7 Years' War.
So the British win it in the war, effectively.
Yes, effectively. They never fight there, as far as I'm aware. There's small native actions because the British love funding the natives to fight their wars
That
for
was
them.
one of their key kind of strategies.
And it worked very, very well. In this war, they kind of turned the natives a little bit against the Spanish. They're like, hey, you guys probably want better terms. We'll give you better terms. Annoy them. And they did. Though this is a little bit before the time of the actual Seminoles themselves, because I'll take a brief detour into this. The Seminoles are not one unique group of people. They're not one tribe or like a group of tribes. They are a construct tribe, as in they are from the Creek, who were in the area north of Florida. They are from the, I'm forgetting the other names. Choctaw, I believe, is one of them who is related to the Creek. But there are a few other tribes, most of them much smaller. There's a reason why I remember the Creek and the Choctaw.
Those are the two big ones
large
I hear
ones.
about. Like, especially
Yes.
like Georgian history and all that.
Yes.
Those two are definitely very much involved with that. Just
Exactly.
slightly to the north.
Exactly. So they were pushed out of Georgia very quickly. They were pushed out by the Georgian and Carolinian settlers. And due to that, they kind of formed their own odd cultural group. It became kind of a new tribe in a way. And it was also classified as such by the Spanish and the Georgian colonists, then British subjects, as this is all one group of people, the Seminoles. And that is their true beginning, because they are not one unified people. This is a people. This is a non-homogeneous group of people who are maybe loosely related, but they don't see it that way. They are unique to their own bands and groups. Like the ones that would refer to themselves as Creek would have been Creek for 50 to 100 years, separated from the other ones who would call themselves like Lower and Upper Creek. Like there's that distinction, as well as the Choctaw are hundreds of years separated, completely were their own tribe from the moment of contact with Europeans.
So it's basically a very, very broad culture group, if even. Like
yes.
That's like at best what they could be described.
Yes, which have all effectively, which will come a little bit later, but they've all effectively been grouped into one area, which is the Southeast. The Cherokee are, at this point, almost inside the fledgling United States, which is still the colonies, and they are going to get pushed out at the same time as these Seminoles, which, of the groups, ironically, the Seminoles are far less controlled. They are, for a time, the most powerful player in the regional politics. This is more towards the later half of British rule or early United States rule, in like the late 1700s, early 1800s. They are a significant regional power, but again, completely disunited because they're all these different groups.
So there's really no cohesion between these people, is what we're finding out.
Not at all. They work together when it suits each other, but if there's a tribe, 2 tribes away from you, you're not going to care about them in the slightest. They're not your people. They
too much
don't
distance,
even affect
too much
you.
difference.
Exactly.
Just vaguely maybe related in some sort of cultural practice, if even.
Exactly. Vaguely similar practices like, they're also herders or ranchers, or, they also have limited agriculture. Like, that's it. They're identifying similar features, but they're not going to band together to fight a significant outside threat unless it's directly affecting them.
So we call this the Seminole Wars because it involves these people, but we shouldn't get the idea of Seminole as like one united tribe.
Exactly. And that's very, very important, because otherwise, in the context of just the invasions by outside forces and even the invasions or wars between themselves, there is never a united front. Just as the Europeans are divided between, Spanish, British, and later American, it's the exact same thing with the Seminoles being divided between, Choctaw, Creeks, and
everyone else, basically, in the area.
Else. Yes, the 5 flavors of Creek that are there that day.
Yeah, and one thing that's interesting, too, is that the Seminoles are still, in some ways, like, splitting off, or at least... the most recent one I can think of is the Miccosukee tribe. They actually split off and became their own recognized federal tribe in 1962, long after our story today. But I just thought that illustrated how not really truly united the idea of Seminole is even now. Seminole is still a cultural group in a lot of ways. We've made up of very many tribes and different people groups. So just wanted to illustrate that. So what's the next step here? How do these people that we call the Seminoles get involved in the Seminole Wars, and how does this politics between Britain and Spain lead to that?
So once the Spanish are kicked out in 1763, the British treat them a lot better, as was basically their terms. And the few natives who weren't considered Seminoles who were with them, who had been converted by the missions or something like that, they went with the Spanish for the most part. They were perfectly happy to stay along with them and go to Cuba, as well as the rest of the Spanish Caribbean.
Really? So they kind of spread out actually beyond
Yes.
the continental United States.
So very few Seminoles are from those other groups that were there before then. So the Seminoles were just completely new to the area. Sure, they've been there for maybe at the longest like 100 years by this point, but they're still the new kids on the block. Aside from heck, even the Spanish were there longer.
Okay, so these weren't people who had been there for like literally hundreds or thousands
exactly.
of years.
This is not their ancestral lands. This
is the people who rolled up one day basically at the same time everyone else did.
Yes, they saw open territory and they said, we're getting pushed out of our old place. This is great new land. We're going here.
I can see why this conflict might have happened because it seems like it was basically a free-for-all over the land in Florida. Okay, so no one really had, outside of force, the best claim to like who should be living there, it seems.
Yes, it was very much, who has it at this moment, and it was the Seminoles.
If you can hold it, it's yours. If you can't, it's not.
Exactly.
Okay, so very law of the Florida Everglades jungle down there. Okay.
Exactly. So with that, after the British had taken over, they got along, and that was okay. Britain still, unfortunately at that time, practiced slavery, which was prominent in its colonies. Spanish Florida had been a haven for slaves to escape to because it was a depopulated colony. They needed the people. So they would get down there, they'd get their freedom, and they'd just mostly just hang out and have their own lives there. These people became known as Black Seminoles because, similarly, they were just people pushed there through just the kind of situation of the time. They didn't really want to be there.
Was there a specific reason that Florida was like a slave haven? Was it just because you needed people to come there, so it was just their scheme to get them there? Or was it like some other ideological difference? Or is it just a very kind of weird...
It was just kind of a weird situation of it's better for us to have these people. It wasn't an intentional lure. It was just you're no longer inside the British Empire. You're free because you were enslaved as a British... You weren't a British subject, you were a British slave. You were their property.
You're British property, yeah.
So once you are out, well, you could be considered a person again, and the Spanish were perfectly happy to consider them people.
So it was more of a kind of a lucky break sort of thing. And then they just decided to run a fit, and through both probably pragmatic and potentially ideological reasons, they just kept it going.
Yes, exactly. And that comes back to bite with the eventual Revolutionary War, because at this point the Seminoles are firmly in Florida. The British begin once again paying them to help them. They did this with the Creeks still in the southeast region as well. They pay them to help fight the fledgling United States, and that did not endear the Georgians to the Seminoles at all. They obviously wanted the expansion of the land, but they also fought in a war against each other. And sure, there were certain tribes that fought on either side. That's just kind of the way of it. But these natives were constantly raiding them, constantly making their lives hell, as well as the British also, during the Revolutionary War, went back to that policy of if you get to Florida, you're free, because they offered slaves their freedom in order to fight for the British, which is, kind of a new level of pragmatist and also mildly cowardly, but they really tried to win.
Very interesting politicking happening here.
Exactly. But that made Florida an issue for mainly
Hang on.
Georgia.
That made Florida an issue. I feel
it's
like
always an issue, but
and I'm not using it as any commentary against modern Florida by any stretch of imagination. Actually.
I am, but
okay. Well, I have relatives down in Florida. I have been there. I've always thought it's been fine, but I haven't also explored the entire state. I don't have any opinions about that. I just think that's very funny. That made Florida an issue. When is that not something you can say about like the current events going on in this country? It just seems like Florida's always been a hotbed of something.
Exactly.
It just depends on what,
Something's
good or bad.
Always happening down there.
It's an exciting place. You can't call it boring.
Yeah, that's for certain.
Well, I'm sorry not to distract from the conversation.
No.
Keep going.
Perfect. Yes, Florida, the issue, is going to be defining for the next 30-odd years, even longer in American politics. As, well, the Revolutionary War returns Florida to Spanish possession. They hopped in just to try and get their land back.
Okay, real quick, not
yes.
to cut you off there, but I just want to figure out, okay, so Britain gives up its claim on Florida after the American Revolution, right?
Yes.
And the U.S. doesn't claim Florida, so Spain just decides to run in and take it, or how does that
Spain
work?
hops into the Revolutionary War.
Oh, right, yes, because
on
they're
our
allied.
side.
Yes, there's the French and the Spanish and the Dutch are helping
Yes.
us, the U.S. here.
And
And,
it
was
doesn't work
that
out
just
well
like
for
a-
everyone. But
was that a concession that we gave to Spain, basically, is we'll give you Florida back?
I believe it was, we don't want any British influence in the continent anymore, but we kind of had to tolerate Canada. That was not really...
we tried. We really
did
tried.
invade. It just didn't go well.
We would
So-
try again a few decades later and have no better luck, unfortunately.
Exactly. Unfortunately. We'll get to that, actually, because that is something that happens concurrently with the invasion of Canada in the War of 1812. Is
okay,
we slide on into Florida.
I'm excited for that bit.
Yes, because the British slid into Florida. Like, again, cowards. We've been over this.
Again, Florida was both a place
An
and
issue.
an issue. Okay. All right. Good
Yes.
to know. Interesting.
But essentially, yes, the United States secured the win as well as they secured Spanish Florida to return, and the sequel is never as good as the original, and Spanish Florida was exactly the same. It was a bit of a mess because all the Seminoles were not particularly happy with the Spanish because the British gave them a lot of good terms. They were very friendly, and the Spanish came back and didn't really seem to know what they were doing in a lot of ways.
Well, by the end of the 1700s, that was kind of the story of Spanish colonialism.
Yes, exactly. I don't even think many of the original people moved back to Florida.
Yeah.
The ones that all fled to Cuba, I don't
They just
think...
stayed there, yeah.
Yeah,
that
there was
sounds
no
about
mention
right.
of that in my research. It's just, the Spanish came in, probably some new Spaniards.
It's probably people who had just some sort of basically nothing else to do in the empire, I would assume.
Yeah, that
just
kind of
given
a
the
thing.
status of Florida at the time.
Exactly.
Would be my guess.
But there was a brief period, actually, where the Spanish, who had now taken over, were so just utterly useless and completely toothless. Like, they controlled the territory on paper, but they had St. Augustine, they had Pensacola, and I think that was it. As far as real control, the Seminoles were in real control of all the rest of the territory. And there was even a small insurgent state founded by a black loyalist who actually I can't remember if he became an officer. I thought he did. I just...
Like in the British military?
Yes, in the British military, of course. But he was very, very important to that region because he was I think he ended up really being a black Seminole, one of these people who was... They got their freedom, and he intermarried with the tribes, and he tried to actually make a state out of the tribes, out of the
Really?
Seminoles. Yes, called the State of Muskogee. And more on that in potentially another episode because it's a very fascinating topic. But essentially, everyone in the area kind of joined hands, and the British kind of just looked away and said, all right, just deal with it. It's,
So there was an attempt at some sort of unification
Yes.
of the area, and
And
assuming it didn't pan out.
clearly did not pan out.
Huh.
Yes. It was kind of a sad thing to just go, not without a fight, but it was brought down with relative ease.
So it really just faded away pretty fast. It just wasn't able to
They
solidify.
were able to get the guy, and he
Oh.
was the only one doing any money moves. and
Once
it was,
the main architect of the
Yep.
plan goes down, there's no success.
there
or
was
anyone
no
else.
saving the plan.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Whether or not the plan would have even worked is completely debatable.
Sounds like it was a long shot thing.
And the only guy who could do it was taken out of the picture. Yeah.
A tale as old as time right there.
Yep.
That's a shame.
But, so, that is an interesting period, and that goes for quite a while, where the Spanish don't really do anything, the Seminoles don't really do anything aside from put down roots and have a great time for the next 20-some years.
Yeah, 20 years apiece.
Exactly. And
Nice.
then the United States just begins to slowly but surely encircle
Looming
Florida.
in the background.
Yes. Louisiana Purchase is huge for this, actually.
I would imagine that
once-
really kicks off southern and western expansion even more than it already been happening.
Yes, exactly. And especially getting a hold of that part of Louisiana that is east of the Mississippi, which did not come with the Louisiana Purchase. The Spanish claimed it as part of West Florida, because Florida was the entire Gulf Coast, all the way from New Orleans and all the way over to, I guess, south of Georgia.
Oh, so all of that's
it was
considered the Florida territory.
Yes, there was
Okay.
West and East Florida. East Florida is modern day Florida, pretty much.
That's a terrifying
It
idea.
is, yes. Don't worry, it sorts itself out rather quickly.
Thank God. I thought Louisiana was scary enough.
Yes. So after the Louisiana Purchase and the United States having encircled Florida, due to the Peninsular War in Europe in 1810, which we won't talk about, but essentially the Spanish government completely falls apart.
Well, I can give you a quick
go right ahead,
briefing
Aaron.
about the Peninsular War here. So you might remember this little incident if you watched in our original run of side stories here. The story of the Mexican War of Independence. Not the Revolution, that's a different thing. Because again, Mexican history, names specifically, are very, very tricky to keep in line. But basically, Napoleon invades Spain at a rather inopportune time when Spain itself was already going down the gutters. He puts his brother Joseph Bonaparte on the throne, old Joey Bottles, who you might remember from that episode where we did a biography on him. And I never realized how much this event was covered in our old episodes, actually. And then let's just say that because Spain is underneath nominal French control, but it's in effect going through a civil war, this would become a really common theme for the next about 120 years or so of Spanish history, by the way. As it turns out, civil wars out the wazoo. But anyways, essentially what happens is that Spain is not able to govern its empire. This is when the final nails in the coffin are starting to hit it. And that would be the story for the rest of this century. But this is when you get Simon Bolivar and all that going down in South America to become independent. And you also get independence movements in Mexico. So, yes, this is that sort of event. That's the very shortened version, but apparently it hits Florida too.
Yes, indeed, because Florida was, ironically, in a way, one of the most loyal of the colonies, as well as one of the unfortunately plagued by other factions colonies, as in the case here with West Florida, which gets annexed into the United States because, long story short, there's these three factions inside of West Florida. The governor is like, we should, you guys want a republic? I can tell overwhelming public opinion is for a republic. Here, you three sorted out the pro-U.S., pro-Spanish, and pro-independence factions. Those were the three factions. The governor says, all right, you guys can sort it out, whatever, I'll respect it. And then he sends a secret letter which gets intercepted to Spain saying, I need troops, we've got a rebellion, oh no.
That just sounds like Spanish politics summed up in...
Exactly.
At least Spanish politics of the 1800s summed up in about 5 seconds.
Yes. And, he gets thoroughly deposed, a republic is temporarily declared, and then the U.S. faction wins because the U.S. Army is
there,
ready to go. The only faction whose troops were able to get into position, really.
And usually when that happens, you win by default.
Exactly.
Good job, America. Way to go.
Mm-hmm. So with that, West Florida, which included Baton Rouge, I believe, actually, that's probably the most important city that I can think of off the top of my head.
New Orleans, or is that not
no,
quite?
New Orleans was part of the purchase.
Right, yes, the French part. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. I just want to make sure because it was... That was
at
also
least the French
flipping.
Quarter. I don't know about anything.
That was flipping hands a lot too.
Yes,
but
no,
that's a different
it's
story.
Very confusing, if
Yes.
I'm being entirely honest. But
I had gotten missed a little bit of the timeline there. It's like, right, of course that's French.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
going to be the big thing.
And
that's going to be Americans. Everything will be America eventually.
Exactly, and that is actually the mental state of the U.S. at this point, because President Madison decides to move on the eastern half of coastal Florida, which is the western edge of East Florida, Florida Panhandle, basically.
Okay, Panhandle. That's
I know,
a lot easier.
it's so confusing, and then I just say that.
Somewhere near Tallahassee.
Yeah, roughly. So the goal is, okay, things are falling apart. Florida's probably going to, disintegrate or not exist anymore. Well, we're here. We might as well take it. And it's currently a problem to us. And the last thing we want is the dirty British there.
We can't have that.
And at this point, this is nearing 1811, late 1811, I believe, December 1811 is when this is all coming together, where actual East Florida is starting to truly look like it's going to fall. And so a military expedition gets prepared to keep it out of, again, French or British hands, because at this point we don't really like either, but the British are the key fear here because guess what? We're about to be at war with them in the War of 1812. So they send a General George Matthews, to approach the Spanish governor and acquire the territory. And he's kind of instructed very specifically, but he manages to kind of dodge the rules with kind of this genius idea. it's a little underhanded, but I
can't
still
wait to
call
hear
it
this.
genius. Yes, so the exact orders are you take any territory after an arrangement with the local authority. With most local authorities in East Florida perfectly happy to keep the status quo, he sets out to rearrange the status quo.
Of course he does.
Yes, he raises a force of volunteers, mainly Georgians, civilians that were given arms by the army, but they're not army troops.
They're militia, basically.
Exactly, but they're also not, U.S. militia. They're just, these are not
The
affiliated
locals.
with us. Yes, the locals, which he will then go forward and use them as a proxy to overtake towns, becoming the local authority.
And let me guess, the local authorities hand over stuff to...
Oh, yes, they're
Of
perfectly
course.
happy to work with the United States. They also, these people are known as the Patriots,
Of
which
course
is
they
just
are.
such a great, great way to describe these people. Because really, they're just getting America more land. Isn't that a good patriotic thing
It
to
is
do?
very patriotic.
So basically, they try and get as many locals as they could to get their rubber stamp on it, just so it's a little more legitimate. And then they just, sign over the land to the army, which is marching right with them.
Like right behind.
Yes,
like
right
So
behind.
the Patriots go and set up their little camp or whatever it is that's actually
Yep.
signifying their local autonomy, quote unquote.
Mhm.
And the army's like, what, like half a mile away, if even?
Normally, they shared the same camp, in
Oh,
fact.
so it's literally the same.
Yes, so that they couldn't get attacked at night or anything to be forced out. It's like, no. The army is protecting these civilians of ours who are then, doing these potentially illegal things that I don't, I don't support, I don't endorse, but, they are the local authority because they have strong-armed you into being the local authority.
So he's bringing the local authorities from out of state or however
Mhm,
far away
exactly.
they are to the places that they're going to claim authority over. So the army can go and then say, that's America because the local authorities have given us the
Exactly. They
Huh.
would raise their own little flag on the flagpole. They'd sign over the land and they'd put up the U.S. flag.
That is honestly a genius move.
Yes, unfortunately, it doesn't work.
Oh, dang it.
Well, it
I was
doesn't,
starting
it
to root
doesn't.
for them.
I still think it did, work. I would call it a success. But sadly, these efforts fell completely apart once word of it reached Congress, who was scared of doing the right thing for once.
Of course, Congress.
And also a war with Spain. But,
well, that makes more sense.
Spain couldn't do anything at this point. I really think it was a stupid idea.
Yeah, because again, just so I remember, it's 1812 is when this is
Yes.
happening. Yeah, Spain
Spain
couldn't
couldn't do
anything at all.
anything, but they just didn't want to be the aggressors too badly. Because the British are impressing our sailors. War of 1812 reasoning of we're the injured party. With Spain to be like they're the aggressors, like give us this land. So I don't entirely know, but yeah, once again, Congress really shot down the efforts. But they
There is
also
still some land taken though, right, during this whole scheme.
No, actually,
really?
they completely, as a sign of good faith, they give it all back.
Oh, wow.
And then our hero comes to the table and says that's not allowed. But we'll get to that.
Oh boy.
But essentially, they actually ran into an issue with, I can't remember which town it was. I want to say it might have been Pensacola. No, it was St. Augustine. It was St. Augustine. They're getting close to St. Augustine. And this is where the Seminoles come into this picture, because as of the moment, it was just, we're signing over towns that are Spanish to the U.S., but then it becomes an issue that the Seminoles are potentially losing some of their land, or at least land that was very friendly to them now could be hostile, because the U.S. and Seminoles are not on great terms due to the slave,
A lot of
runaway
things.
slave issues, the native issue, a lot of things.
Florida was once again the issue. Or at least
Yes.
where the issues were going down this time.
Absolutely. And so they begin to oppose this Patriot War, as it is called. They eventually are lobbied, essentially by the Black Seminoles specifically, who are on the verge of taking up arms to help the Spanish, because they didn't want to be in this war. They really didn't. But if it comes down to whether they want to be re-enslaved or remain free as Spanish citizens. And they're very inclined to one of those two options.
I wonder which one.
Yes, so they eventually convinced the Seminoles that you should help the Spanish because they're bad, but these Americans are worse. And then after the U.S. Army, who is having a conference with the Seminoles, directly threatens to, we will destroy you, really bad call. The Seminoles enter the war on the side of the Spanish and start raiding the army and the Patriots are clearly not able to deal with this. The army struggles to deal with it. They burn down one Seminole town as they retreat back to U.S. territory, and so ends the Patriot War with no land really gained. Mainly is the Seminoles, honestly, who really force no gains out of this, because the Spanish would love to say, oh yeah, nothing really changed, that was all illegal. The Seminoles are the ones who really enforced that, of, any U.S. citizens come in, the Seminoles just chase them right back out, which happens actually because some of the Patriots say, oh, we claim this land, we want to go back. There's a brief period, another kind of fascinating side story of history.
Good name drop. I like that.
I know. I try. But they settled a small little area. They built a bunkhouse, essentially, and then their leader got by some Seminoles while he was out riding one day, and it all came crumbling down as per usual.
For the second time.
Exactly.
In however many years.
It's, in like 30 years, two attempted independence movement. Yeah, it doesn't go well.
And just to clarify here, because I know we're talking about the Seminoles here, which again
Yes.
are a very loose cultural group of people.
Yes.
Do you know which main tribes are kind of actually affecting this battle right now? Is it mostly
Most
the Creek and Choctaw still?
Yes, Creek and Choctaw for certain. I believe the other ones are the ones farther south who are not really in this, or either that or they're the ones who are actively allied with the U.S. because they're, again, Seminoles are a large group. At least some of them were pro-U.S.
Yeah, so when we're talking about the Seminole Wars, again, just to clarify, it's not necessarily fighting the Seminoles, it's wars involving the Seminoles
Yes.
is the better way to think about it.
Though if it's all wars involving the Seminoles, it should be pretty far back. But
yes.
the first Seminole
At least
Wars
involving
are
the U.S. and the Seminoles
Yes.
and this very kind of strange mix of various events.
Yes.
This isn't like a clean cut like World War I, World War II.
Yeah,
this is
the opposite of clean cut.
This is the giant messes that happened in Florida for a few years.
Yes, exactly. For, decades and decades.
This is the kind of history I enjoy.
Exactly. So after that Patriot War has ended, as well as their residual efforts to try and take some of the territory, it's kind of finally time for the main event here, and Andrew Jackson kind of looms up on the horizon like Attila the Hun, like I'm coming.
Yeah, that's what he was like.
Which gets us into the actual War of 1812, which is
I love this story.
Yes, but specifically the Creek War, which is happening partially concurrently to the last event, the Patriot War, as well as the War of 1812 kicking off.
And again, the Creek War is going down in Georgia. Right?
Yes.
This is
Western Georgia.
Side note: if you've ever seen the classic Davy Crockett series from either the early '60s, late '50s, it's the Walt Disney one, the one that started the coonskin cap craze. I think it's late '50s. This is where the first episode starts, is in the Creek War, where they're fighting the Red Sticks, which are like the traditionalist group of American Indians, which is a great show, by the way. It's 3 episodes long. It's very, very good. Highly recommend that. Fun one to watch. But just thought I'd drop that because I loved that as a kid.
Yeah.
And I see when we're talking about this, like, I know this story, kind of. I watched a TV show on this.
So this actually, the defeat of the Red Sticks is very, very important because that is what forces them into a treaty, the Creek with a treaty. And it's a bad treaty. It kicks most of them out of that area.
Rough.
And relocates a lot of them into Spanish Florida, which they kind of immediately assimilate into the Seminoles. They're already very, very close.
Oh, that's not so rough.
It is and it isn't, because a lot of the Creek, during the Creek War, there's a bunch of Creek who are on the side of the United States. And this is where the divide kind of becomes permanent. It's from here on out, if you were on the side of the United States, you are no longer going to be considered part of the Seminoles. You are pretty firmly this, U.S. allied Creek. And there's no brotherhood anymore. It's all over now.
Interesting.
Yes, so the Seminoles get their numbers swelled quite a bit by this. They were already powerful. Now they are a serious threat, and a lot of them have a bone to pick with the United States, specifically Georgia.
It's always Georgia.
It's always Georgia. But yes, so the War of 1812 is again in full swing, and guess what? The British have gone back to their petty tricks, and they're recruiting the Seminoles for the war effort. They're always petty.
Brits.
Yes.
So limey.
So after fighting the British, which he loved to do, Jackson really, really had just had enough. He drove them out of Pensacola, actually, which is just, really the last straw. No, not really. Sorry. It was bad attempting cola straw.
Oh,
yeah,
I didn't even get
It was
that.
awful.
Oh, man.
I
No,
tried.
I'm keeping that in. That's good.
But unfortunately, at that point, after he'd driven the British out of Pensacola, Jackson kind of had enough with the whole thing, but unfortunately, because the Seminoles were involved in that and they were helping the British, and yeah, bad time, but again, not part of the Seminole War, and it was just minor skirmishes, but man, Jackson got really annoyed.
That happened to him a lot, actually.
It did. A lot of duels, a lot of that kind of stuff, but
a lot of bank killing, lots of things.
Unfortunately, though, for him, New Orleans was calling. He had to go win a very, very important victory there. So,
Which inspired a number 1 hit song by Johnny Horton. I'd highly recommend The Battle of New Orleans if you have not heard this song. Good one. By the way, a really brief side note. There used to be basically at least regional, if not national level celebrations of the anniversary of the Battle of New Orleans way back in the day. It was kind of like the second 4th of July. And I firmly believe we need to bring that back. I just wanted to mention that as a brief aside. We might do an episode on obscure, forgotten holidays.
That would be pretty great.
That'd be a good one. But just keep that nugget of knowledge in the back of your head. I might go into that deeper sometime.
Yep. So back to the action here.
Yes, the action.
And Jackson's very mad with the Seminoles, but he had to go. He had to, go do his duty and all that. But he never forgot. And I will.
He never forgot anything, that guy.
So essentially, at the end of the War of 1812, which ended in 1815, a British commander was building a fort at the end of one of the border rivers with Georgia.
This would not do.
It would not do at all, because they built the fort and they went, oh, well, war's over. We can't be here anymore. It's Spanish. Well, we have all these native allies here, and a lot of them are in deep trouble if the U.S. tries to, attack them. And a lot of black Seminoles specifically, there's like, oh, we recruited all these people, former slaves and all that. Oh, we better not, leave them. This is the one nice moment in British history. We better not leave them just completely without anything. We'll just leave them the fort. They can just do whatever they want because it's not our problem. So then they just left and they left a lot of pieces of artillery, a lot of ammunition for that, as well as black powder.
Fort with
they gave them a fully functional British-made fort at the important part of a river that the Americans are probably going to have to get supplies up.
I can imagine this made some people very mad. And a different group very happy.
Yes. And so this becomes Jackson's problem again. And you can tell that this man is not going to deal with this in a reasonable way. But he does the smart thing. He just sends a letter to the Spanish governor, say that the fort's in their territory. You better, take it back. I have in my notes, Jackson now back from New Orleans and juiced up on dead Brits.
Which is true.
It is
actually.
Exactly.
That's not even an exaggeration.
And then, he told the governor to take care of the fort or he would. The governor said he didn't have the forces. So Jackson, instead of doing it like he said he would, he delegated to someone else, to a Brigadier General Gaines. Gaines delegated 2, and he picked the right man to clinch the victory. In fact, Duncan Lamont Clinch.
That's his actual name?
That is his actual name.
Do you think he...
he clinched the victory, all right,
Was
Aaron.
clinching the victory a phrase back then? Because if it was...
I have no idea.
I wonder where that comes from.
Who knows? Maybe it's from this?
Maybe. I mean, honestly, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. But, so, Clinch has this brilliant idea of, what if we build a fort that we have to resupply by the river? Because then we have a reason, because they'll fire on our unarmed military transports. That's pretty important. Firing on unarmed military transports, who would do such a thing?
Can I just say that this was clearly the golden age of military scheming?
Oh yeah,
was
absolutely.
Just this stuff, the things they would do
fun.
just to get one up over each other is the funniest things you'll ever read are just these silly ideas they came up with.
And the best part is over half of them seem to work.
Yeah, this really was again the golden age of military political schemes was just doing whatever we can do to get one.
Yeah, exactly. So Clinch takes this force, this rather large force, in fact, over 100 U.S. soldiers and about 150 Creek warriors, led by their chief, William McIntosh. Creek name is White Warrior.
We're not making that up either. That was his actual name.
Mm-hmm. Their job was to protect the supply boat's passage. They also brought Navy gunboats, 2 of them, because they knew what was about to go down.
And when you say Navy gunboats, how roughly, what's the size of these things?
They're not large. They have cannons mounted on them, but they're probably... This is on a river.
Yep.
So this is...
Like a war canoe, are we in that area? Or a little bit bigger?
This is definitely a small little sloop or something like that, retrofitted with cannons, probably only 2 to 4. Very small amounts, but also this fort is probably not manned by the most experienced gunnery crews.
Probably not.
So it was also, they were supposed to protect, they didn't want to go in there looking like they're attacking the fort, because that's in Spanish territory. We're not, that's a Spanish fort. Yeah. They were just trying to avoid the problem.
So they send 2 little ships, and I believe a sloop, if I remember correctly, is that a one-masted like sailing ship? Is it
yes.
one-masted? Okay, so pretty small.
Mm-hmm. I'm not the most adept at naval classifications, but these gunboats are not seafaring gunboats. These are like Coast Guard. But they
are they actually run by the Coast Guard?
They are, again, the actual account reads Navy, so I would assume actually Navy, but they probably requisitioned them from the Coast Guard. The boats are probably, Georgian Coast Guard or something like that.
That would make sense, I suppose.
I don't know the exact origin of the ships, though.
You didn't look at that tiny minutia detail there.
Yeah, it's one of those weird things. The Navy found 2 gunboats. I mean, that's just, they have them.
They had them around somewhere.
Exactly.
That's the thing about when you read about these stories, is you always want to look into every little detail. But at the end of the day, we don't have 15 minutes to delve into the gunboats. But I just wanted to bring it up because it's interesting.
But so, as predicted, they fired the fort fired on the gunboats. The gunboats fired back. Their 9th shot a superheated cannonball.
What is a superheated cannonball?
It is basically it's called a hot shot in
literally
naval terms.
Okay.
Yes. And it is where they heat up a ball so it starts everything on fire that it touches.
Oh, okay. So it's literally like a flaming shot.
Essentially, but it's solid metal, so it's not flaming, but it sets things on fire.
Okay, and they warm it up. Do they put it, I'm assuming, in a fire or like an oven or something? Or whatever they have on the boat to heat things up
Pretty
with?
much, yeah. I think it's like a brazier or something similar like that. Yeah, I don't think they have any kiln. They're not making pottery. But
probably not, but you know what I mean.
As funny as that would be. But yes, so they used
I'm sorry,
a hot
I don't know
shot.
all of the different historical words for oven. I forgot. Okay.
But the goal of the hot shot, though, is you hit powder, you hit wood, start stuff on fire, cause, more distress. It actually, I believe, slightly would dampen the effectiveness of the ball because the metal's going to bend a little bit.
Yeah.
But also, you hit a good part and it does more damage than a regular cannonball. And that's the case with this 9th shot because it hits the fort's powder magazine.
Oh, no.
And the ensuing explosion levels the entire fort.
Oh, man.
And it is heard more than 100 miles away in Pensacola.
So that had to be one of the biggest explosions.
It was
biggest explosion in U.S. history up to that point?
One of the biggest. Yeah, up to that point, almost certainly, yes.
I can't think of anything else that blew up louder than that.
Yeah, not in that age. So
some people, right? So I'm assuming a lot of the people in the fort, right, probably didn't have that much knowledge of artillery and might not.
There were women and children in there.
Oh no! So they
not like the U.S. Army knew that, but
they were behind the walls. No one can see them. Right?
Exactly.
Could you just imagine being by there, or if you have to wonder if there's some bystander, right, just watching this because there's a lot of shooting going on. I'll go investigate, or people on both sides obviously are seeing this, right? So you have to think about all the people who are here, and then all of a sudden that happens, and just the utter confusion and
the fort gets leveled in front of you.
Yeah,
basically.
There's people here who have no idea what just happened, right? That must be traumatizing.
Yeah, for certain. I honestly think that alone probably is the career-defining moment for a bunch of those U.S. Army personnel. Just
it was
holy,
the craziest thing they'd ever seen in their entire life.
Yeah,
man. Mm-hmm. Well, that's fascinating. I had actually never heard of that trick before of heating up a cannonball. That's really cool.
No, it worked a lot, actually. And this is exactly the result that they were hoping for. Literally best case.
This is exactly what we wanted, to blow it off the map.
They wanted to clinch that victory.
They sure did.
And they sure did. And then they just went home, is the best thing. They didn't even, clear out the fort. I mean, fort's gone. Bring it back to base, boys.
Turn that ship right back around.
Yep. And the supply boats went upriver, and it was perfectly fine.
Nice.
And so this causes a minor war with the Seminoles. If anything, this kind of is at least one of the, all these ensuing raids are the inciting event of the war, but this is the event that leads up to the inciting event for the First Seminole War. And the army, is attacked, or some settlers are attacked. The army retaliates, which causes more retaliation back from the natives, and back and forth and back and forth. And very, very quickly, the U.S. had enough because, once again, Andrew Jackson's in charge of this area, and this guy named Gaines is in charge of this area, who, his name is Gaines for a reason. He wants to go get some gains. He wants to gain some friggin' territory. However, Gaines unfortunately was not in the right place at the right time. He'd gone off to fight some pirates. So instead, they conscripted the only man absolutely foaming at the mouth to go attack some more natives, Andrew Jackson. Official orders were to invade Florida to deal with the natives, not invade, Spanish Florida, because, oh no, it's the Spanish have this. We can't have a war with Spain. Oh no. However, giving this order to Andrew Jackson, of all people, was essentially a blank check, and the consequences of that are going to have to be dealt with immediately, because he just goes in. He just goes
for it.
He goes right for Spanish Florida. He's like, all right, here's the control points. Oh, there's a bunch of native villages. Oh, well, let's get rid of them.
And
very few Seminoles actually die in the first Seminole War. Most of it's in the retaliation strikes back and forth and back and forth. Jackson's march is so large that there's not really much to be done by the Seminoles. They harass him. He tries to send more raids back by the army. The army, at this point, really sucks at going out into the swampland of Florida.
They didn't have much experience with it.
Yeah, no, they're not having a great time. The Creek War gave some of them a little bit of experience, but between that, and I believe he had Georgia militia as well alongside him. I may be wrong on that, but all of the men he had they did their job great. He was very, very successful, but he also went straight for Spanish Florida rather than the Seminoles because he said, all right, these Spanish are helping them. Gotta get them out of the picture.
Enemy combatants.
Exactly. There's a few minor incidents here which are more alongside the annexation of Florida because, again, the first Seminole War is as simple as these raids back and forth while the annexation of Florida is going on, and Jackson is doing his business, just absolutely wrecking what is left of Florida. Because at this point, as I've kind of established, Florida is, at least the European-held parts, minuscule. It's maybe 2 to 3 cities, depending on the day, it seems. Because, sure, they're trade ports, Seminoles trade with them, and the trade goes out, but that's it. That's all that's really of importance in Florida. This isn't a land conquest. This isn't what Jackson's trying to do. His goal is to fulfill his order to get rid of the Seminoles, and he doesn't really get rid of them, but he contains them very well in Florida. But then, in kind of his own, again, the consequences of his own action, we get Florida, which means they're now inside our border, which means they're now entirely our problem. And that is where the biggest trouble starts, and what leads to the Second Seminole War, which by far is the most destructive. It's the most important of the three by far, and it's the one that has the longest lasting consequences. But we'll get to that on the next episode.
Yes, so hopefully this has been a very good introduction to the Seminole peoples, the early American Republic, and its conflict with them and thereof, I suppose, and also hopefully gave you a deeper knowledge of what was going on in the American South at the time, and maybe a little bit of Spanish history too.
Yes.
So, and also, we've covered the first Seminole War, so
we're
now getting to the main event, which is the Second Seminole War.
Because
there's a grand total of 3 Seminole Wars, right? In all of U.S. history?
The third and the first are almost footnotes. The first is more important than the third by far, but it is just, again, it's a sideshow to a main event that kind of comes back to bite with the second.
Okay, well, look forward to hearing more about the Second Seminole War on our next episode, and also concluding our Seminole Wars little series here, because it's going to be a part 1 and 2.
Yep.
So, yeah, any final thoughts you have, Jacob, before we sign off for the day and tell everyone to have a good night and all that?
My final thought is, once more, screw the British.
Well, yeah, I mean, always.
Least, yeah.
Yes.
At least the British in Florida at this particular time.
The particularly British Florida, screw that. Bad thing that never should have happened, according to Jacob.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. All right, anything else? Anything else?
No, aside from thank you for listening.
Yeah, again, thank you all. We will catch you on the next episode. Hopefully this has been interesting and informative and entertaining to you all. So have a great day, and we will catch you all for the conclusion of our Seminole War series, where we talk about the Second Seminole War, the Third Seminole War, and its influence on U.S. history. We will see you all then. Goodbye.